Do you know what happens when you bury someone alive in their own silence, when you chain a human being to a wall and forget they ever existed? The people of Bayou St. Marie learned the answer the hard way, and what they discovered was far more terrifying than any ghost story you've ever heard. Because this isn't about a haunting, this is about justice that refused to die. Picture this: a plantation owner found kneeling on his porch at dawn, his wrists burned and bound by chains that glowed red hot in the morning mist, his face frozen in an expression of pure terror. No wounds, no struggle, just the unmistakable mark of iron seared into his flesh. 3 days later, his overseer vanishes in the middle of the night, leaving behind only a twisted chain and footprints that end at the water's edge. Then his wife, locked in her bedroom, screaming about a woman she swears is standing at the foot of her bed. By sunrise, she's dead too, her wrists bound to the bedposts by rings of black metal that crumble to rust the moment they're touched. 3 deaths in 2 weeks, all connected by the same impossible detail: chains that appear from nowhere and disappear into rust. But here's what makes this story different from every other ghost tale you've heard. This wasn't random, this wasn't senseless, this was calculated revenge. 15 years in the making, and it all started with a woman whose name the world tried to erase. Her name was Alara. The year is 1832, and Belrive Plantation spreads across 3,000 acres of Louisiana swamp country. It's a machine of suffering, disguised as Southern elegance. White columns, manicured gardens, and beneath it all, the systematic destruction of human souls. Alara wasn't supposed to be there. She was educated, literate, refined, born in New Orleans to a Creole mother who taught her to read and write, to carry herself with dignity, even when the world refused to see her as human. When her mother died, Alara was sold like furniture. At 16, she became the property of Nathaniel Rusk, a planter who believed cruelty was just another word for order. He brought her to Belrive because he needed someone who could keep his books, manage his correspondence, handle the details of running a plantation. And for a while, it worked. Alara moved through the house like a ghost, silent and efficient, her hands always occupied with papers and ledgers. She spoke only when spoken to. She never raised her eyes unless ordered. She did everything right. But that's exactly what made her dangerous. Because in a house built on ownership and control, competence looks like rebellion, and intelligence looks like a threat. Nathaniel's wife, Lucinda, saw it first. The way her husband's voice softened when he spoke to Alara, the calm efficiency with which the servant moved through rooms that should have intimidated her, the quiet dignity that couldn't be beaten out of her, no matter how hard Lucinda tried. And then there was Samuel Boyd, the overseer, a man who ruled the fields with a whip and a pistol, who saw Alara's composure as mockery. He told Nathaniel once that a woman like her needed reminding of her place. Nathaniel laughed and said she was too valuable to damage. Boyd smiled and replied, "The chain doesn't damage iron, it only shapes it." That conversation would echo for years. But there was one person at Belrive who saw Alara as human. Eleanor, Nathaniel's young daughter, followed her everywhere, asking endless questions, learning to write her name, counting flower petals while Alara worked. Those moments were the only tenderness either of them knew, and in a world built on cruelty, even small acts of kindness become dangerous. Then came the night everything changed. It's summer, 1832. Storm clouds have gathered over the bayou all day, thick and heavy as lead. Near midnight, the sky breaks open, rain hammers the roof, thunder rolls through the fields like cannon fire. In the nursery, little Eleanor sleeps beneath a quilted blanket, a single candle burning on the table beside her bed. Alara is in the kitchen, adding up figures by lamplight, when she hears it, the faintest sound, like wood popping under heat. She looks toward the stairs and sees smoke blooming through the hallway above. By the time she reaches the nursery, the flames have already climbed the curtains. She wraps a blanket around her arm and lunges for the child, but the fire moves faster than breath. The ceiling cracks, sparks shower across the floor. She covers her face and stumbles toward the door, choking on smoke. In the chaos, she feels a small hand slip from hers. When she wakes, she's lying on the porch in the rain, her hands blistered raw. Behind her, someone is screaming. Lucinda's scream cuts through the thunder and doesn't stop, because Eleanor is dead, and grief needs someone to blame. For 3 days, the plantation exists in a fog of mourning and confusion. Nathaniel walks through the ruined nursery, over and over, staring at the blackened crib. Lucinda refuses to eat or leave her bed. Then Boyd comes to Nathaniel with a rumor. One of the maids claims she saw Alara near the stairs just before the fire. Another says she heard her muttering a hymn. None of them can agree, but grief doesn't need truth. It needs a target. Nathaniel summons Alara to the hall. Her burns are wrapped in rags, her face pale from exhaustion. He asks where she was when the flames began. She tells him the truth. She was in the kitchen. She ran when she saw smoke. She tried to save Eleanor, but he doesn't want truth. He wants guilt. And when Lucinda enters the room, fever bright and hollow-eyed, she gives it to him. "She killed my daughter," Lucinda whispers. "I saw her watching the door that night. She envied what she could never have." Witchcraft. That single word seals Alara's fate. They drag her across the yard in the rain. The old storage house by the swamp stands waiting, a low building of cypress wood with a single door and no windows. Boyd orders men to bolt her wrists to the wall with iron cuffs. When she flinches, he smiles. "If she's the devil's servant," he says, "iron will hold her." They leave her there in the dark, and Nathaniel returns to his house, pours himself a drink, and tells himself he's done the right thing. Outside, thunder rolls away into silence. In the swamp, frogs begin to sing again, and beneath their chorus, a new sound emerges, the soft clink of metal, as Alara tests the length of her chain. Boyd tells the workers that the woman confessed to witchcraft, and will remain bound until her guilt can be proved or disproved. No such proof is ever sought. The weeks become months, the months become years, and the door to the storage house stays closed. Now here's where this story becomes something else entirely, because most tales of injustice end in death. The victim suffers, dies, and is forgotten, but Alara refused to be forgotten. She couldn't escape the chains, she couldn't break free, but she could listen, she could remember, and she could wait. The storage house stood at the far edge of Belrive, half hidden by reeds and cypress roots. Its boards were warped from years of rain. The air inside was thick enough to drink, heavy with the smell of mud, mold, and rust. Alara had nothing but the clothes on her back, and a chain, long enough to let her reach the bucket in the corner. The first night, she tried to sleep sitting up, but the cuffs cut into her wrists whenever she moved. By midday, a boy appeared at the door with a tin plate of food. He slid it inside without looking at her, and fled. Days blurred into each other. No one came except the boy with food. Sometimes it was a man instead, silent and sullen. None spoke to her. The chain grew heavier in her mind than on her body. She counted time by the way sunlight moved across the dirt floor. When the rains returned, water seeped through the boards and pooled around her feet. Mosquitoes hummed, frogs croaked, and the smell of rot thickened. Nathaniel never visited. Lucinda refused to say her name. Only Boyd remembered she existed, and his memory was a form of cruelty. He came when he was drunk, carrying a lantern that swung like a pendulum. "How does it feel?" he would ask, voice slurred. "Still waiting for your devil to save you." She never answered. Her silence enraged him. Once he struck her across the face. The next morning, he bragged to the field hands that she had the eyes of a snake. 1 year became 2, 2 became 5, 5 became 10. The chain bruised her wrists until they swelled. When the wounds healed, they left black scars that never faded. Her hair turned white from the damp. Rats gnawed at her food. She learned to stamp her heel, to frighten them away. The small space became her entire world. 4 paces from wall to wall, 1 window slit. The constant sound of dripping water. She learned the language of those drips, how to tell when rain would come by their rhythm, and she began to pray. At first, her prayers were for forgiveness. She still believed someone would remember her, but as the seasons changed, her prayers changed with them. She asked less for mercy and more for memory. "Let them remember," she murmured into the dark. "Let the chains they forged speak for me." The boy who brought her food started leaving small things behind. A crust of sweet bread, a wilted flower. Once he dared to ask her name, Alara. She answered softly. He said his name was Caleb. From that day, he placed the food gently instead of throwing it. He told her about the fields, the harvests, how the other slaves spoke of her as a ghost. "They say you'll never die," he whispered once. "Maybe that's true," she replied. 15 years, 15 years of darkness and chains, and the slow, steady erosion of everything except will. Her body grew thin, her voice grew faint. Sometimes, she forgot the sound of other people speaking, but her mind remained sharp. She remembered every cruelty, every insult, every moment of cold neglect. She remembered the child who died. She remembered the husband who condemned her. She remembered the wife who called her witch. These memories kept her alive, long after her flesh began to fail. And on the night she finally died, something extraordinary happened. The chains that had held her for 15 years began to remember too. It was a quiet death, no drama. No final words witnessed by anyone, except the darkness. Caleb found her days later, sitting upright, hands folded in her lap, eyes open and staring at the crack of light in the wall. The chains glowed faintly with a reddish sheen, as though heated from within. Boyd ordered men to bury her beneath the floor, without ceremony. Nathaniel said no prayers should be said. "She has no soul to bury," he told them. They nailed the door shut again, sealing body and chains together. And that should have been the end. But it wasn't, because that night, the air around the storage house never cooled. Even when rain flooded the fields, the ground there steamed. At night, workers claimed to hear soft clinking, like someone breathing through metal. Boyd told them it was rats, but he stopped passing that way. After dark, 3 weeks later, Nathaniel Rusk woke before dawn to the sound of chains moving through water. He rose, thinking it was livestock breaking their tethers, but when he stepped outside, the sound seemed to come from everywhere at once. The porch, the walls, the ground beneath his feet. It stopped the moment he spoke her name. The next morning, servants found him kneeling on the porch, his body bent forward, arms drawn behind his back. A rusted chain encircled his wrists, fused to the skin. The links glowed faintly red in the weak light. His expression wasn't pain, it was astonishment, as though he'd glimpsed something he could neither understand nor deny. 3 days later, Samuel Boyd vanished. His cabin was found empty, the door still bolted from inside. The window stood open, and his pistol lay on the floor, its barrel bent, as though struck by tremendous force. Outside, the grass was flattened in a path leading toward the swamp. At the end of that trail, half buried in mud, lay Boyd's hat, and a length of chain blackened by fire, twisted into a knot that resembled a noose. And then came Lucinda, the woman who'd condemned Alara with a single word. She spent her final days wandering the house, speaking to someone unseen. "You waited so long," she murmured. "You have every right." On the night of her death, the rain returned after weeks of drought. When Caleb found her the next morning, she lay on her back, eyes open, wrists raised above her head, bound to the bedposts by rings of dark metal that gleamed wetly in candlelight. The metal crumbled to rust as he watched, sifting down her arms like reddish dust that stained his hands and wouldn't wash off for days. 3 deaths, all connected by chains that appeared from nowhere, all marked by the same impossible truth. Alara had kept her promise. She had made them remember. But here's the part that haunts me most. After Lucinda died, the entire plantation burned. No one knows how the fire started. It began in the east wing and spread faster than anyone could run. By dawn, only the chimneys stood. The garden graves where the rusks were buried had collapsed inward. The soil blackened as if fire had burned through the ground itself. And in the ruins, witnesses swore they heard chains beneath the crackle of dying embers. The swamp reclaimed everything. Within a year, Belrive disappeared beneath the water. Where the great house had stood, there was only a shallow pond ringed by cypress trees. Travelers began calling it Widow's Bend, and they said that on certain nights when the moon rose red, you could still hear it. That sound, clink pause clink, like breathing, made of metal. Decades passed. The story spread beyond the parish, changing with each retelling. Some said the Iron Widow had been a witch. Others said she was an angel sent to punish the wicked. But one thing remained constant: the sound of chains that came from the water at night. In 1913, a historian named Margaret Devil visited the site. She dug into the soil and uncovered a piece of iron chain, half-eaten by rust, but still intact. On one link, faintly etched beneath the corrosion, she saw words, "Forgive them not." That fragment now sits in a museum in Baton Rouge. Students pass it every day without noticing, but those who know the story can't look at it without hearing that sound, the whisper of iron that refused to rust. Today, locals still avoid Widow's Bend. They say the bayou breathes differently there. The water ripples without wind, and if you stay long enough to listen, you'll hear it. That rhythm. Slow, deliberate, unending. Scholars call it gas escaping from mud, but the people who live there know better. They know it's the voice of justice that refused to die, because Alara's story didn't end in her death. It ended in the silence that followed, the silence that learned to speak. The house, the family, the fields, they all fell to dust, but the chain endured. It rests somewhere beneath the reeds, rusted yet whole, the single link between the living and the forgotten. And here's the question that keeps me awake at night: was this revenge, or was it something else? Because revenge is hot and immediate. This was cold and patient. This was 15 years of silence, transforming into a force that couldn't be stopped or reasoned with. This was a woman who became something more than human, because humans had treated her as less. Maybe that's the real horror of this story. Not that Alara came back, but that she had to, that no one remembered her until she made them. That justice only arrived when it wore chains. Some nights when the moon rises and the cypress trees shine like silver, a faint light glows deep within the bayou where no fire should burn. Fishermen who pass by whisper a greeting and row faster, but a few linger, watching the glow fade. They say that if you listen carefully, you can hear the faint whisper of a woman's breath carried on the water. Not a curse, not a cry, just a memory shaped in sound. The chains that bound Alara for 15 years became the voice that spoke for her long after the world stopped listening. And that voice still speaks, in the ripple of water, in the whisper of wind through reeds, in the stories parents tell their children on stormy nights, in the weight of history that refuses to be forgotten, because some silences are louder than screams, and some chains once forged can never truly break. If this story left you speechless, check the video on your screen now. I believe it was made for you.